be at least irritated, if not quite so angry, under such circumstances. No, what they remembered was that John List, who had obviously been asleep when the night sergeant phoned to report that his daughter was being held in the police station, showed up in a suit and tie, smelling faintly of aftershave lotion. Who gets up and puts on a suit, with a white shirt and tie, at 2:30 in the morning? The police chief at the time, James Moran, recalled wondering the next morning when an officer mentioned it to him casually. "Oh, I know the guy," said another cop, a man who drove a patrol car. "The guy lives in a big house up on Hillside Avenue. I've seen him out there mowing his lawn in a suit and tie." 4 months later, when Chief Moran arrived at the horrific crime scene where the bodies of John List's wife and 3 teenage children all lay in grisly display on the ballroom floor, with his mother slain on the 3rd floor of the family home on Hillside Avenue, that was what he recalled about the head of the List household. The guy in the suit and tie, he did this. The memory of the night at the police station would trouble the teenage girl for all of the little time she had left to live. Although Pat seldom mentioned her family life to friends, "We were preoccupied with being hip," one of them, Eileen Livesey, recalled. "It just wasn't hip to talk about your family." But Pat did tell another friend about being brought in by the police and taken home by her father that night. She was frightened, not of the cops, but of her father, that friend, who had a budding teenage romantic relationship with Pat, though he said she never let it go beyond petting in the back seat of his 1967 Mustang, remarked, "Not just, 'Boy, I'm in trouble now,' frightened, but really scared of the guy. She believed her father truly hated her." John didn't speak to his daughter in the old Chevy that night as he drove the mile back to the house on Hillside Avenue in the most affluent section of town. That wasn't unusual, however. John had almost completely stopped talking to his daughter several months earlier, after he had told her he strongly disapproved of her friends, whom he called hippies, her attitude, which he decided had become rebellious, her tight jeans, which he said made her look like a cheap slut, and her aspiration to have a career in the theater, which he considered sinful. Despite the hour, John slammed the car door when he parked in the drive that curved behind the big old Victorian house. Once inside, he made enough of a commotion to wake the entire household, which, besides John and his daughter, consisted on that night of Helen List, John's 46-year-old wife, their 2 teenage sons, John Jr., 15, and Frederick, 13, Alma List, John's 84-year-old mother, and Eva Morris, Helen's mother, who was on an extended family visit and would depart for North Carolina by the end of the month, a happenstance that would save her life. John, a taciturn man who seldom raised his voice, even when severely provoked, began berating his daughter in the center hall that dominated the interior of the 19-room house. "You are out of control," he shouted at the girl. "But, Daddy, we were only—" "You are going straight to hell, and there is nothing I can do about it." For a second, she told her friend later, she was afraid he would slap her across the face, although John had never raised a hand to his children. Pat held her ground silently, without defiance. "There is nothing I can do. You leave me no choice," John shouted with a note of finality. On either side of the center hall was a grand staircase that curved up to a landing on the 2nd floor. A large amber chandelier hung from the ceiling high above the hall. On the 2nd floor, the noise had drawn Helen from her bedroom to the railing, where she stood in her nightgown. Down the hall, the boys huddled with their grandmother Eva. Above, on the landing outside her apartment on the 3rd floor, which was accessible by a single staircase behind a door on the right, John's mother was also awake, watching quietly from the shadows. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Pat was pleading downstairs. As the girl started up the steps, Helen moved into the light to wait for her. "Slut!" John shouted at Pat, a modest, shy girl who trembled at the insult. In the past, her father had been verbally abusive. "Brat" was a frequent insult in her adolescent years, but only recently had he begun hurling imprecations based on the girl's budding sexuality. A month earlier, when he had caught her going out the door on a hot and humid Saturday afternoon, wearing a thin cotton T-shirt bearing a peace symbol and the words, "Make love, not war," he had braced her in the hall.